So, Anders, you play one of the worst right-wing extremist terrorists that we've seen in modern history in 22 July. I wonder, when you were first brought on board, did you feel a certain amount of responsibility in recreating the events in this film?
Yeah, it felt like a huge responsibility. But I remember thinking that the only thing I can do is to try to create a truthful portrait. I just wanted to be as honest as possible, and I didn't want to censor myself from any good source of information. Yeah, that felt like the only thing I could do, and the only way to solve the task.
Was it difficult for you? I mean, you seem like a very nice, charming individual in real life. So I wonder, was it difficult for you to find your way into portraying this person?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I'm a very emotional person in real life, and the character I was set to play is um, emotionally completely detached and disconnected from what he's done. He hasn't shown any signs of remorse or regret or conscience, and for me, that's impossible to understand. So at a certain point, I started playing behavior more than thoughts or psychology, because I knew that I have gotten to a point where I wouldn't understand more of this person. But behavior is always accessible to us, so I knew that that would always be playable.
Mhm. I think the other difficult thing must have been, because I don't know how you make um, an honest portrayal of somebody like this without delving into, I guess, sympathy or empathy or even glorifying his actions, if that makes sense. I mean, to be able to play the facts of somebody um, and be devoid of all those different things that actors usually bring to their characters.
Yeah, I understand your question, but I think that, well, to me, being in the mind of the character, or becoming another person, is seems to me a romantic idea of what acting is like. I personally, I don't have to like my characters. I will always try to understand them, but that's not always uh, possible.
Mhm.
And when you reach to that point, you can always try to play behavior instead. Um, I think this is a person. I've watched this person in police interrogations. I've watched hours of police interrogations, and it's very hard to feel any sympathy for this person. It's very, very hard. And I don't see any way. Uh, I don't see myself that I could glorify what he's done, or um, and that's not necessary either for my interpretation. Um, uh, there is, he. Some people think that he's had a bad childhood, or that he's been somewhat a victim of bad parenting, and he's also he has an awkward personality, and there is some evidence that he's been rejected socially many times during adolescence and early adulthood. Um, but the person I've seen in interrogations is a very robust, resilient political terrorist, and I think that the most important factor here is the process of radicalization. I
Mhm.
think he has gone through a process of radicalization that has provided meaning and purpose in his life. And I think we have a tendency to underestimate the danger of radicalization.
Right, and I guess the thing I was getting at was, it's very easy to fall into this trap of because so often with people like this man, we try to find explanations, easy kind of explanations for why they would do the things they did. You mentioned his childhood and things like that, but more often than not, I mean, it's just, it's hard to, it's impossible to explain.
Yes, and I think, you know what, coincidence is also a factor here. I think we have a tendency to always try to create meaningful narratives. In hindsight, we try to, and often psychological explanations that make sense to us. But this is a very um, unlikely event in any case. And I think that the one factor that we haven't talked enough about is radicalization, because I think that it is possible to have a fairly okay life. You can have a family, you can have an okay income, and still um, you can feel that something is lacking in your life. And there are examples of that. Other people from middle class backgrounds who have great educations who end up as terrorists. And I think in an affluent society, um, one of the biggest existential threats to us is the struggle to find meaning and purpose in a life, and that's why radicalization is so dangerous, because it can provide exactly that.
Right, and I mean, in terms of, looking at the film's relevance to today, I mean, certainly this kind of right-wing extremism has been going on for decades.
Mm.
Um, but, the film touches on, uh, you know, fear of immigrants, right? Wanting to keep Norway pure. And you see the ways in which that kind of extreme thinking often leads to violence.
Yes, and this was a very this was Paul's vision. This is a local story with a global message. And even though he was a lone wolf terrorist, he operated within an ideological context. And these lone wolf terrorists, they often come from a herd. And unfortunately, there are many people out there who share his political positions. And I think some of these ideas are more widespread now and more mainstream in today than they were in 2011. And uh, that's also why it felt important to um, be a part of this film, and it felt important that this story was told right now, because I know that some people think it's too soon, but you could also argue that at some point it will be too late.
Right. Well, it's also striking to see, as somebody who lives in America, watching the opening section of the film, which is the attack itself. Um, it's striking how commonplace these things are in this country. you
Yes.
know,
Mm.
and how we almost don't give a second thought to it unless there is, unless the casualties are in the high double digits,
Yes.
which certainly this one was. Can you talk just a bit about, um, you know, the film in the context of that?
Yeah, I think even in an American context, this is a level of brutality that we are not used to. I think the massacre on the Utøya Island is I believe it's the worst massacre committed by one person in peacetime. So it's an atrocity that is almost impossible to understand. Um, but I think that every terrorist attack is in a way unique, and there are unique stories within this big narrative that we call the 22nd of July. Um, but I think for this film, it made sense to um, um, turn it into a story with a more universal message because of the political aspects of it. Because this is also one of the most political or politically motivated terrorist attacks in recent memory. These the victims were not random targets. You know, it was an attack specifically directed towards the Norwegian Labour Party.
Was it difficult, or were you nervous about recreating that moment? Because I think that, you know, so often we see in films shootouts and, you know, people getting riddled with bullets, and it's presented in a very exciting and, you know, glorified way in order to, you know, titillate the audience. But obviously that is not the intent here. So were you nervous about having to put yourself into that situation, you know, for this film?
Of course, I was nervous, but I also knew that we had a very good director.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot. I felt that I trusted Paul. I could sense that he was reflecting on this and thinking about this constantly when we filmed the island scenes, for example. And I felt that every choice that we made on set was a result of you know, thinking and reflecting and deliberation. Do we need this shot? What is the how much violence do we have to show? Because you know, some of the families and survivors told us that, well, you shouldn't censor something for our sake. You know, some of them said that we actually want you to tell the truth.
Right.
So you have to find the balance there. I think it works very well in the film, but I think it's important to show how brutal it was. I think you need to have been to feel that you've been there, and because that exposition in the film is important to understand the aftermath as well.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, I was nervous, and I remember that we were spending a lot of time setting up the camera at the right place and trying to justify or finding reasons for every shot and every framing.
Right. We'll talk a bit more about working with Paul Greengrass, not just in that segment of the movie, but throughout the film. What does he give you as a director that helps you with your performance?
Well, he gives you a lot of freedom. He trusts you. When he casts you, he trusts you. But he also provides safety. So you sense a director who is in total control. And perhaps because he knows what he wants and because he's a confident and experienced director, he dares to give you more freedom. I think that's what it boils down to. But he's really awesome to work with. He's a great person. You know, he's a warm person, and that was very important too. I mean, because when you make a film about these events, you have to know that it comes from a good place. You have to know that it comes from the heart, and the intentions have to be right, you know. And I always sensed that with Paul, and it was for me one of the reasons why I said yes, you know.
One of the interesting things about the film is how it's structured, because I mean, on the one hand, you have this first half about with the attack itself, and then the film goes into the aftermath and the court case and, you know, the response. And there's this really interesting relationship that develops between your character and the lawyer, who, you know, is caught between, on the one hand, being disgusted by your actions, but also, you know, understanding your right to a fair defense. And so there's this interesting dynamic that grows out of that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think that the irony here is that Breivik was the one who chose him. He's a lawyer who haven't he haven't had that much experience with like serious homicide cases, but he defended a neo-Nazi once, and that was in fact a homicide case. And because they had shared um, the same office, or they had the same lunchroom or something many years before. He wanted this lawyer, and the irony is that he was the perfect lawyer to represent Norway, because he was not only representing his client, but he was also defending democracy, our judiciary system. So he was kind of doing both, and he did that in a very nice and sensitive way. And I think almost every Norwegian was very satisfied and you know, proud of the job that he did.
Right. This film is going to be in theaters and on Netflix very soon. You know, we talked a bit about the social relevance of it. What do you hope people who see this film take away from it?
Well, I hope that they can see this film as a cautionary tale about the danger of political extremism, the danger of radicalization, political, ideological, and religious radicalization. That's my hope. I also hope that they can see that this is also a story about that there's a battle of ideas going on here. And it's always a dilemma whether you should give a platform for ideas that are unpleasant or ideas that you don't like. But as Paul has said, whenever there's a fire, it doesn't help to shut the door, you know. And I think we have reached that point with ideas like anti-multiculturalism, anti-globalism, even conspiracy theories about European elites conspiring with Islamic states about turning Europe into an Islamist colony with Sharia. You know, these ideas are much more widespread, and you can stumble upon them every now and then. And that was not the case in 2011. Something has happened, and we are living in a world now where liberal democracy is under threat from populism, from political extremism, and it's my hope that people will watch this film and see it as a cautionary tale.
Well, it's a powerful film and an important one. Anders, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on your work. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.